Welcome back. As promised, we're getting into a discussion about how to extract South Africa's youth demographic dividend to its full potential. Too many young people in this country do not have jobs, even though they have gone to school and they have gotten a qualification and they qualify for one. CNBC Africa's Meyer will be leading this conversation on improving the youth employment story in this country, and he joins the show right now. Meyer, afternoon.
Good afternoon, Fifi. Thank you so much for having me. Now, South Africa's youth unemployment rate sits at 66.5%. According to all available statistics, the president's much published YES program, which has absorbed more than 400 billion rand of investment, has failed to make a dent in youth unemployment. Furthermore, the government introduced a social relief grant of 350 that the youth could access as a response to unemployment and the COVID-19 pandemic. We have decided to engage South African youth today on matters of unemployment and their economic participation. Joining us are Meyer, Policy and Learning Manager at Youth Capital, Jack Cullen, Development Studies student at the London School of Economic, and Masechaba Ntsani, SRC and Political Council Secretary at the University of Johannesburg. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CNBC Africa, and let's get straight into our discussion this afternoon. Let's start off with Masechaba, or let's start off with Jack. As a young South African, take us through what the State of the Nation address communicated to you, Jack.
Hi there, Meyer. Thanks for having me. Well, I think the president really focused much more on structural, broad reforms focused around the economy. And I think, of course, that's important for the youth. It's important that they grow up and work and live in a flourishing economy. But I would have liked to have heard a bit more from the president in terms of directly speaking to issues around youth unemployment. As you mentioned rightly, it's sitting at extremely high rates, 60-something%, and it's actually 75% unemployment if we talk about people under the age of 25. So it really is a catastrophe. The president did mention some policies. You mentioned his youth employment scheme, the YES scheme. He also mentioned the presidential economic stimulus, which raises about 850,000 job opportunities, about half of which are aimed at young people. So I would have liked to have heard a bit more from him in terms of how to continue to expand that and continue driving employment among the youth.
Very interesting, Jack. Masechaba, let me pull you in. You're a student in the political structure of your university. What did the State of the Nation address say to you, Masechaba?
Basically, what the State of the Nation address said to me is that although the president is trying to put forward things that can mitigate the issue of youth unemployment, it's not enough. Yes, there's the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. Yes, there's the SA Youth Mobile Platform, which 2.3 million youth are on that platform, and about 600,000, if not more than that, have been placed. Yes, there are things that are being done to ensure that youth do get opportunities, but is it really enough? And does it really speak to the experience that they have acquired in TVET colleges as well as universities? I don't think so. Because I think what we should be focusing on is giving youth the opportunity to actually use the skills that they've acquired throughout their TVET education and university education to ensure that they're better prepared to actually be able to perform within those particular spheres wherein they have studied for. Thank you.
Fantastic. Meyer, as a policy and learning manager at Youth Capital, what was your assessment of the address focus on the youth?
To echo what Jack has mentioned, the president spoke very little in terms of directly speaking to youth unemployment, or specifically to youth and youth issues. So it would have been quite nice to hear more about that. But he did speak to broader issues of the economy and government's intentions to unlock the economy and drive economic growth. which is key to the issue of employment broadly speaking, and then specifically youth unemployment, as unemployment in South Africa is mainly a youth issue, given how many young people are unemployed. So while Sona didn't mention youth as directly as I'd have liked, or speak more about some of the youth interventions that government has implemented, the focus on the economy and efforts to unlock the economy, for example, support SMMEs, it was also quite important.
Masechaba, you're still a student at the University of Johannesburg. Youth unemployment remains the ticking time bomb that we are all worried about, with more than 2/3 of young people being unemployed. In your opinion, what should be done about youth unemployment?
I feel like perhaps the government should provide subsidies or capital to the youth so that they can perhaps start their own businesses that can then empower them to employ more youth. Another thing that I feel like the government could also do is introduce a basic income grant, wherein if you're not employed in that particular time, then the government can then find a way to fund your lifestyle, not necessarily your lifestyle, but your basic needs, like your toiletries, things that can help you look for jobs, such as your data and the likes of such things, airtime as well.
Mario, there are a number of government initiatives that focus on creating employment for the youth. Are they working? Do you think they are working?
These types of programs you mentioned, yes, Jack mentioned the presidential employment stimulus. They are having an impact. The challenge is that youth unemployment is so large that these programs are not having an impact at the scale that is necessary to really make a dent in the youth unemployment figures. These programs do have a lot of value in that they provide skills training, skills development for those who participate in them. They provide a meaningful work experience, at least some of them do, and they provide, or try to provide, some of them an exit strategy for the participants so that they can go from that particular program that they participate in to a next opportunity, whether that's studying further or into the labor market. So these programs, they have an impact, and they are the programs that we have at the moment and that are being invested in. The big challenge is that we need these programs to work at a bigger scale, and accompanying that, we need the economy to be growing so that there is a pathway into meaningful economic opportunities for young people who participate in these youth employment programs.
Very interesting, Mario. Jack, coming back to you, let's talk a little about the fact that today's youth is the most educated in the history of South Africa. However, this does not reflect in the skills base that the country needs. Why is there a mismatch between the kinds of skills tertiary institutions are churning out and the opportunities that may be available?
Yeah, you're right, Marek. It is a serious problem that so many of our unemployed youth are actually those with degrees, those with matric. I think in a well-functioning labor market, a well-functioning economy, those people should be able to find jobs. So I think there's certainly a problem in terms of the supply side of the kind of jobs that are being created. There's clearly a job creation issue. And I think, as I've mentioned and as Mario mentioned, that really does come down to broader economic problems facing South Africa at the moment. I think if we start to get some of the structural reforms right, fixing our power supply, encouraging investment in the economy, then we'll start creating the kind of jobs that our graduates are actually prepared for already. But in addition, and I think Masechaba mentioned this, we also need to start focusing on more specific skills that are geared towards, for example, our industrial policies. So Masechaba mentioned the need for more training in TVET colleges. I think that would be quite helpful to have more hard skills. Perhaps there's a bit of a perception among employers and business that young graduates don't really have the skills that they really need in their businesses So I think that would go some way towards improving that.
Jack, I want to stay on you around the basic income grant. I want you to elaborate just a little bit more on this basic income grant. And, does it work in other parts of the world besides, in South Africa and in Africa? What's your take on this basic income grant on a global basis?
Well, I think in this regard, South Africa is actually a trailblazer. I mean, we, especially for developing countries, have a really big and hugely important basic income system already to some extent, if we talk about our grant system. It's not a basic income system yet. I think it will and should be. But I think what's important to recognize, as the fellow panelists have mentioned, that our unemployment problem is so deep and so structural that I think we need to confront the fact that perhaps we will never, or at least not anytime soon, create enough jobs to absorb just the sheer number of unemployed people that we have. That is such a deep problem. So the best alternative we have is for the state to basically support the incomes and the livelihoods of people, young people included, through a basic income grant. So just to break it down very quickly, I mean, it's a basic income grant. So basic means it supports people sort of their livelihoods. I mean, the COVID-19 special grant, the SRD grant, is only 350 Rand a month. I mean, that is seriously basic. It's below the food poverty line. So if we're talking about absolute numbers each month, it's not a huge amount, but at the same time, it will do so much for people to, make them meet their basic needs. And additionally, it'll just support them in this period of deep structural unemployment while we try to get our policies right to create jobs and actually eventually absorb people into the labor market once again.
All right. Masichaba, as a political council secretary of the University of South Africa, besides unemployment, what else is hampering on the overall development of youth, and how can these challenges be addressed?
Generally, what's hampering not only the development or the employment of the youth, but as well the development of the economy is generally, number one, the COVID-19 pandemic has really taken us back quite a lot. Number two, the electricity crisis in the country. How can we properly function as a country and actually progress when we constantly have power cuts? That really does affect economic output that the country can achieve. Another thing that's hindering empowerment of the youth is that not enough, although yes, there are programs in place, but then again, I need to mention that those programs are not skill specific. So let's say you've studied towards something like, for example, me, I have an undergraduate degree in politics, philosophy, and economics. And then now the president decides to put forward the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, which then deals with assisting students in universities during period of examinations, for example. What am I supposed to find? Yes, it's a job, and it's only for that particular period of time. What am I supposed to, number one, do with those skills? How do they align with what I have studied? Number two, that period, that job is only for that particular period of time. So then what happens to me when that particular job ends? There should be something in place, like, for example, a grant whereby I can subsidize the basics that I need in my life when that particular cyclic or contract job comes to an end.
Mario, is it fair to say that South Africa's youth should focus less on what government can do for them and become self-starters?
I think you're speaking to the issue of entrepreneurship. Businesses do have a role to play in job creation, obviously, particularly SMMEs, and a lot more focus, I think, is needed in South Africa around the ecosystem of support around entrepreneurship. Establishing a successful business is a very difficult endeavor. Most businesses fail within their first few years of functioning. So it is a little bit unfair, I think, to say to young people that the economy is not creating the jobs needed, so go off on your own and become a business owner and create jobs for yourself and others, when it's very difficult to be successful in establishing a business. So we are going to encourage more young people to become entrepreneurs and start small businesses. We need to provide them with the support that they need to improve their chances of being successful, including financial support, including support to mentorship, including making the administrative burdens associated with being a business owner a little less onerous. So in addition to punting entrepreneurship, a lot more needs to be done to provide the support for young people who decide to go that route to providing support that they need to be successful.
Very interesting. You know, we were speaking about the basic income grant, and you've heard it from the youth of South Africa sharing their opinions. That was Meyer, Policy and Learning Manager at Youth Capital, Jack Callant, Development Studies student at the London School of Economic, and Masichaba Nsansi, SRC and Political Council Secretary at the University of Johannesburg. We move on now to our social manager, that's going to be coming on to the show, and we're going to be speaking about this week's poll.
Yeah, I look forward to having her after this very short break. A really refreshing panel discussion there, just hearing the thoughts from young people as to what can be done at this juncture to solve for the problem. Of course, a really refreshing insights regarding the basic income grant, just acknowledging the huge scale of youth unemployment right now, acknowledging the fact that while some initiatives that government has got on the go are working, the scale of the problem means that government at this juncture cannot create the amount of jobs needed to really make a dent in youth unemployment, and therefore a cushion or a support system like the basic income grant right now perhaps would not be a bad idea. Of course, we'll be hearing a little bit more about the basic income grant next week when the finance minister steps to the podium and delivers the budget speech. But until then, let's take a short break, and when we come back, Janet does join us on the show just to take us through her latest social media poll. Stay with us.